Everyone should go and watch Kujo's videos. Apparently his algorithm's struggling and he's not getting any subscribers and he lost 2,000 subscribers. What a dead. Hasn't used enough Big Deno in his videos, that's what I reckon. Na 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 na. Hey Kuj.
Normally when you're painting a miniature, the details you add are going to be largely dictated by the hands of whoever sculptor came before you. All you're really doing is bringing life to what's already there. But it's possible to use freehand to add details which aren't actually on the model. Usually when you hear the term freehand, your mind instantly jumps to the insane work of people like Richard Gray. But even though this is really impressive, it's basically painting a picture on a flat surface. But we want to use our paint to give the illusion of a structural change within the model. When a sculptor wants to add a detail, typically they start with a small blob of clay and then slowly work it until it looks how they want. We can do the same thing, but we will use paint instead of clay. You can see the belly on this little model is basically smooth, but with a bit of jiggery pokery, we are going to be able to create a pretty convincing muscle structure. To make our skin tones, we'll first take a bit of this Games Workshop Talarn Flesh and mix in a little Screamer Pink. We'll use this as our midtone. Then to create a shadow, we'll take a bit of that midtone and mix in some of this Chimera Phthalo Green and a touch more of the Screamer Pink, giving us this dark violet. We'll use that as our base colour, which we've already blocked in, just to save a bit of time. Then we're going to take some of that midtone and, much like a sculptor would, we're going to simply place the paint onto the places where we want our main highlights. Notice we don't care about the detail right now. See this as a sketch, we can worry about the details later. Starting on the belly and then placing some of the colour on either side of the hips. The difference between your base and midtone is going to look quite extreme, but we'll soften that out as we go. With that in place, we're going to make a roughly 1-to-1 mix of our midtone and shadow, creating this in-between colour. And we'll use that to paint around the edges of our highlights, creating a more subtle step between the highlight and shadow. So this just gives us a bit of a head start in the blending process so that initial stage won't be too laborious. Keep working your way around the miniature, painting a small band of colour along the hard edge of each highlight. Once you've done that, take a bit of your pinky midtone and thin it down to a glaze consistency with a bit of water. Take most of the glaze off the brush by soaking it out the bristles with a paper towel. Now you're going to use some stippling to blend out the edges of your highlights. So all I'm doing here is lightly tapping the surface with the very tip of the brush, leaving behind small, semi-transparent dots. And you're going to build these up over a number of layers until the hard edge between the colours starts to fade out. This is much like when a sculptor starts to smooth down the edges of their clay, pulling the edges thin so that they blend in with their surroundings. You can also use standard glazing by gently drawing your brush over the surface, pulling the glaze up and over the edges of your highlights like this. The dots will create some noise on the surface, obscuring the edge of the highlight, and the glazes just soften everything out, essentially filling in the gaps between the dots and making the texture left by the stippling more subtle. You can do this by first basing everything with your midtone and then just blocking in your shadows and using stippling and glazing to fade them out. It's really whatever works for you, everyone finds their own way. I usually favour starting from the shadow and working my way up, but sometimes I start with a midtone when I feel like changing things up a bit. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you'll definitely have seen me use several different approaches to this. Now that we've mapped in our midtone, we'll start to build up our highlights. To do that, we're going to take some of this Vallejo Sunny skin tone and lighten it with a bit of ivory. And we'll mix that into the midtone, making it brighter. In order to create some muscles on this smooth belly, we'll add a small blob of paint in the spots where we want the muscles to be, much like when a sculptor adds blobs of clay to the model. Don't worry about blending this out, we can do that later. We'll also put highlight here on the side, just at the top of the hip. Notice that I make it a little wider at the bottom so that it matches the basic shape of the surface. And I'll paint another one on the other side. When you're happy with the position and the coverage of the layer, thin your highlight down to a glaze consistency with a little water and we'll begin the blending process. Just like we did with the previous layer, we'll start by employing some stippling, using the tip of the brush to apply lots of little dots on and around the edge of the highlights. What you're aiming for here is just to break that obvious edge around the outside of the highlight so that it's not a solid line. So when you're doing this, don't worry if you feel like it's not working. You just have to give it a little time and keep working at it. Use a brush with a sharp tip so that you can keep your dots nice and tight, and make sure that you have control over how much paint is coming off the bristles. That's really important. If it's forming puddles or little droplets, take some more liquid off the brush and try again. Then you can switch to normal glazing using the side of your brush to draw the glaze up and over that hard edge between the two colours, always moving the brush towards the highlight. And you're going to essentially go back and forth with these two techniques until you create a pleasing gradient. Use the stippling to create some noise or texture around the edge of the highlight, and then the glazes to soften things out and reduce any roughness. Don't expect immediate results when you're doing this, so it will take a few passes until you start to see things coming together. The more time you put into it, the more refined it's going to be. So how perfect you want to make it is up to you. But just take your time and try not to rush it. And once you're happy with the blending work, we'll take a bit of that light orange and mix it into our highlight colour to lighten it. Again, making a fairly noticeable shift in brightness. Now we'll block our highlights in, painting them in the same spots as before, but this time making them about half the size as our previous layer. On the belly, we're really just creating the illusion of a muscle structure. The actual sculpt is smooth, but by simply adding highlights, we can trick the mind into seeing something that isn't really there. Again, try to think like a sculptor. All you're doing is placing the paint where you want to create your detail. We don't care about blending. A sculptor places their clay and then smooths it out. We're just trying to do the same thing with our paint. Alright, so with those highlights blocked in, we'll thin that colour down with a little water and begin blending those edges out. So on the belly, all I'm doing is gently pulling the brush up towards the highlights of the abs. Try and fade out that lower edge in order to create a more subtle gradient. And I'll do that over a few layers until I'm happy with the effect. So you can see just by leaving that darker line between the highlights, we're starting to get something that looks more like muscle structure. On this part of the side, we'll switch back to our combination of stippling and glazing in order to blend out that obvious edge. Using our stippling to create some texture and break the edge of the line, then using the glazes to soften things out, going back and forth between the two until we're happy with the transition. Just try to use a brush with a nice fine tip when you're doing this. It's going to help a lot with keeping your dots small and controlled. So this one I'm using is an Skoda Reserva size 1. I've been trying it out for a while and I'm quite impressed with it actually. It holds a point really well. Now when you're doing these dots, remember that the goal is to create a transition from one colour to another. So don't just place them right on the edge of the highlight. Try to place a few quite far away from the edge, but allow the dots to become more spread out the further away you get from the highlight. That way your dots become more infrequent as you move away from the edge, and that creates a gradual fade effect. That way you're going to be able to get a nice soft blend from one colour to the next. For the last highlight, we're going to mix a little ivory into the light orange, making it brighter. Then we'll take a bit of that and add it to our highlight colour. And we'll start to add that to the skin just to finalise our highlights. So I'll add a little here at the base of the belly button to help pick out that detail. There's usually a small hollow there that catches light. Then we'll paint in thin lines along the top of our ab muscles to give them more definition. If you want them to have a less chiselled look, you can just leave this step out. Now I'm going to thin that down with a little water and just gently push it up towards the edge of the muscles to soften those lines out slightly. Once that's finished, it should look something like this. Alright guys, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next video.